It's pretty devastating. When you see these images coming out of Los Angeles with these wildfires just ripping through neighborhoods
Yeah.
and people are losing their homes and everything.
It's really a tragedy by any measure.
But then you add this like extra layer of commentary on top of it, and it's like, are we sure we're not living in some kind of alternate reality here?
Yeah, what's really striking is how these wildfires are being used to push a very specific narrative about DEI,
DEI.
diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right.
We're seeing figures like Elon Musk and Donald Trump, even media personalities like Jesse Waters, trying to link the severity of these fires to DEI initiatives within the LAFD.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit.
Sure.
We've got multiple sources here, news articles, social media posts, even some fact-checking pieces.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to figure out in this deep dive is how this narrative is taking shape and like what it tells us about the bigger picture.
Exactly. And to understand this, we need to start with the facts on the ground. These fires are incredibly destructive, fueled by dry conditions, strong winds, and, the ever-present issue of climate change.
Right. But alongside those very real factors, we have this other story that's kind of emerging.
Yeah.
And it seems to center around LAFD Chief Kristen Crowley, who, just to remind everybody, is the first woman and openly gay person to hold that position.
And she's been advocating for increased funding for the LAFD, arguing that, budget cuts have really impacted their ability to respond to these kinds of large-scale emergencies.
Right. But instead of focusing on those concerns, we're seeing this wave of criticism directed at Chief Crowley, with people accusing her of prioritizing DEI initiatives over firefighting preparedness.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating how these accusations are taking shape.
So give us some examples.
So we have Elon Musk tweeting, DEI means people die,
Oh, wow.
in response to a video of Crowley discussing diversifying the fire department.
Okay.
And then there are accounts like Libs of TikTok focusing on Crowley's participation in Pride events,
Oh, gee.
as if that's somehow relevant to her ability to lead during a crisis.
It's like they're trying to find anything to pin on her.
Right. And
Yeah.
it gets even more specific. We have James Woods, whose own house was unfortunately destroyed in the fires.
Right.
He directly blamed Crowley for not filling reservoirs and emphasizing her focus on diversity.
Wow. So he's saying she focused on diversity and didn't fill the reservoirs.
Exactly.
Oh, no.
And then we have Megyn Kelly, the former news anchor, claiming that Crowley made diversity a higher priority than filling fire hydrants.
It's like, how do you even respond to that?
It's important to look at the broader context here.
Okay.
These accusations are emerging within a right-wing media ecosystem that's been increasingly critical of DEI initiatives.
Interesting.
And they're using very specific tactics to spread this narrative.
Okay. So what are those tactics? Give us the breakdown.
Yeah. Well, they're leveraging fear and anxiety surrounding this very real crisis to promote their agenda. They're targeting DEI as a scapegoat for these complex problems, and they're often using inflammatory language and personal attacks to discredit anyone who supports diversity and inclusion.
Right. So it's easier to point the finger at diversity efforts than it is to deal with,
Yeah, exact.
underfunded fire departments.
Right.
Okay.
And it's not just limited to Chief Crowley. We see Donald Trump entering the fray, blaming Governor Newsom's environmental policies for the fires.
Oh, really? What's he saying?
Specifically those protecting a tiny fish called the Delta smelt.
The Delta smelt. Okay.
He's claiming that Newsom prioritized a worthless fish over people.
Wow.
And to add fuel to the fire, so to speak, you have Fox News host Jesse Waters blaming Native Americans for the fires.
Oh, my gosh. What? How is he blaming Native Americans?
He claims that Newsom tore down dams at their request, and that supposedly impacted firefighters' access to water.
So we've got DEI, a small fish, and Native Americans all being blamed for these wildfires.
Yeah.
It's
really something.
It's almost comical if it weren't so serious.
Right.
But the thing is, these claims are gaining traction. They're being shared and amplified within certain circles.
Absolutely.
And that's where it starts to get really concerning.
Right, and that's why it's crucial to look at the counter-arguments, the voices pushing back against this narrative.
Okay.
Fact-checking sources have debunked these claims pretty thoroughly.
Okay, so lay it on us. What are the facts?
Well, first, there's no evidence linking the LAFD's diversity efforts to their ability to fight these fires.
Right.
Second, the responsibility for water infrastructure in LA lies with the Department of Water and Power, not Chief Crowley.
Okay, what about the Delta smelt?
Well, Newsom's office denied Trump's claim about a water restoration declaration, stating no such document exists. And as for the dams, Well, that's a complex issue with multiple factors at play, but experts have pointed out that blaming Native Americans for the fires is a gross oversimplification.
Right, so it seems like we're dealing with a situation where facts and evidence are being deliberately distorted to fit a specific narrative.
That's a key takeaway here. We're seeing how misinformation can spread, particularly during times of crisis when people are looking for easy answers and someone to blame.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the wildfires themselves.
Right.
This is a case study in how these tactics can be used to undermine trust in institutions, experts, and even entire communities.
Wow, okay.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is a lot to unpack, and I think we need to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll delve a little deeper into this.
Sounds good. You know, it's easy to get caught up in like the specifics of these claims.
Right.
But I think it's important to step back and kind of look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
What we're seeing here is this pattern of scapegoating.
Okay, so you keep using this word scapegoating. What do you mean by scapegoating?
Basically, it's about finding a convenient target to blame for complex problems.
Right.
Often a group that's already marginalized or vulnerable.
Okay.
And in this case, it seems like DEI initiatives and the people who champion them are being scapegoated for the severity of these wildfires.
So instead of addressing like the very real challenges of climate change, drought, and underfunded fire departments, it's easier to just point the finger at diversity efforts.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding responsibility. It's also about exploiting people's anxieties and fears.
Right.
When people are facing a crisis like these devastating wildfires, they're more likely to be receptive to simple explanations and quick fixes.
So it's easier to just blame someone than it is to actually come up with a solution.
Right.
And blaming a group that's already perceived as, you know, different or threatening can be a very powerful way to kind of rally support and deflect attention from the real issues.
Precisely. And it's a tactic that's been used throughout history to justify discrimination and violence against minority groups.
Oh, wow. So like how far back are we talking here? Give us some examples.
Think about the Salem witch trials, the persecution of Jews during the Black Death, or the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II.
Wow. So we're talking centuries.
Right.
So you're saying that this kind of rhetoric that we're seeing today could actually lead to real world harm.
Absolutely. When you dehumanize a group of people, when you paint them as the enemy, it creates a climate where violence and discrimination become more likely, and we're already seeing signs of this happening.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, we've seen a surge in hate crimes against Asian Americans since the start of the pandemic, and there's been an increase in anti-LGBTQ plus legislation and rhetoric in recent years.
Right, and some are even drawing a connection between this kind of rhetoric and the attack on Paul Pelosi.
Right.
The husband of former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Yes, that was a terrifying incident.
It was, I mean, it really shows how words can have real-world consequences.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder that words have power, and this kind of hateful rhetoric can have very real and dangerous consequences.
Okay, so we've established that scapegoating is a dangerous tactic
Mm-hmm.
and that it's being used to target DEI initiatives in this context of the LA wildfires.
Right.
But let's talk about the motivations behind this.
Sure.
Like, why are these figures, these media outlets, pushing this narrative? What's in it for them?
I think there are several factors at play here. First, it's about political power.
Okay.
By demonizing DEI and the people who support it, they can mobilize their base and create a sense of us versus them that benefits them politically.
But it's a way to like score political points and kind of energize their supporters.
Exactly. And it's also about controlling the narrative by shaping the way people think about these issues.
Right.
They can influence public opinion and policy decisions.
So if you can convince people that DEI is the problem, then you don't have to address the more systemic issues like climate change or economic inequality.
Exactly. And there's also a financial incentive here.
Okay.
Many of these media outlets and personalities profit from stoking outrage and division.
Yeah, it's like the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads.
Right. Exactly. Fear and anger get clicks and views.
Fear and anger get clicks and views. That's the name of the game these days.
Sadly, it seems like it.
Right. And then on top of that, there's the issue of ideology. Many of these figures genuinely believe that DEI is a threat to their values and way of life.
Right. They see it as an attack on traditional hierarchies and power structures.
So they're not just doing this for political gain or financial profit.
Right.
They actually believe this stuff.
I think that's a crucial point. It's not always about cynical calculation for many people. This is about their deeply held beliefs and values, and that makes it even more difficult to counter this narrative.
Wow. So how do you even begin to have a conversation with someone when their beliefs are so ingrained like that?
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's a challenge that we need to be willing to face.
Okay, so what can we do? How do we push back against this tide of misinformation and scapegoating?
The first step is awareness.
Okay.
We need to recognize what's happening, to understand the tactics being used, and to call it out when we see it.
So don't just scroll past it on social media.
Right.
Actually engage with it, point out the flaws in the logic, share accurate information.
Exactly. And we need to support organizations that are fighting back against this kind of rhetoric.
Right.
There are groups out there doing amazing work to promote media literacy, fact-checking, and accountability for those who spread misinformation.
And it's not just about debunking false claims.
Right.
It's also about amplifying the voices of those who are being targeted and marginalized.
Exactly. We need to create a space for diverse perspectives and stories to be heard.
And I think that's something that we really try to do on this show.
Absolutely, and I think it's crucial.
Right.
It's about building a more inclusive and equitable media landscape, one that reflects the diversity of our society and amplifies the voices of those who are often silenced or ignored.
So it's not just about like winning an argument or proving someone wrong.
Right.
It's about changing the entire conversation.
Exactly. It's about creating a world where this kind of scapegoating is no longer effective.
That's a tall order.
It is, but it's a goal worth fighting for.
I like that. I like that a lot. You know, it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about how these wildfires have become this battleground for these larger cultural and political fights.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really about the fires themselves anymore, is it?
You hit the nail on the head. We're seeing how a very real crisis can be exploited to push a particular agenda. And in this case, that agenda seems to be about discrediting DEI and the progress that's been made towards creating a more inclusive society.
And it's not just some fringe movement either. We're talking
Yeah.
about people with massive platforms like Elon Musk,
Right.
Donald Trump actively promoting these kind of harmful narratives. What does that say about the state of our public discourse?
It's definitely a cause for concern. It suggests that facts and evidence are becoming less important than ideology and emotional appeals. And when that happens, it becomes really difficult to have productive conversations and find common ground.
So what can we do about it? I mean, is there any hope of turning this tide?
Well, it's not going to be easy, but I do think there are things we can do for starters. We need to be more critical of the information we consume, especially online.
Okay.
Don't just accept everything you read or hear at face value. Do your own research. Check the sources and be wary of anything that seems too good to be true or too outrageous to be believed.
So we need to be more like fact checkers ourselves, basically.
Exactly. And we also need to be more proactive about supporting organizations that are fighting misinformation and promoting media literacy. There are groups out there doing amazing work to educate people about how to spot fake news and propaganda.
Right. And what about those of us who aren't like journalists or media experts? What can we do in our everyday lives to kind of combat this?
Well, one of the most important things is to have respectful conversations with people who hold different views.
Okay.
It's easy to get caught up in echo chambers and filter bubbles, but it's crucial to engage with people who challenge our perspectives.
But how do you do that without like getting into a shouting match or just talking past each other?
It's about listening more than you speak, trying to understand the other person's point of view and finding areas of common ground. It's not about winning an argument. It's about building bridges and finding solutions together.
That's easier said than done, especially in today's political climate.
You're right. It's not easy, but it's essential if we want to move beyond this toxic cycle of division and distrust. We need to start seeing each other as human beings, even when we disagree.
Well, that's a really powerful thought, and it kind of brings us back to the heart of this whole issue. It's clear that these wildfires are about so much more than just fire. They've become a flashpoint for some of the most pressing challenges facing our society today. Misinformation, political polarization, the erosion of trust in institutions and experts.
And at the heart of it all is this question of who we are as a society. Do we want to be a nation that embraces diversity and inclusion, or one that retreats into fear and division?
That's a really powerful question, and it's one that we all need to grapple with. It's not just about the wildfires. It's about the future of our democracy and the kind of world we want to live in.
And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping that future. It starts with each of us taking responsibility for the information we consume, the conversations we have, and the actions we take.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. It's been a heavy one, but hopefully it's given you some food for thought and some ideas for how to navigate these challenging times. We'll be back soon with another exploration of a topic ripped straight from the headlines. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.